This time, I'd like to talk about a mysterious phenomenon currently happening in China. To start, it's widely said that China has entered a deflationary economy. In China, there's overproduction in almost every sector: cars, solar panels, you name it. There's simply too much being made, with too many manufacturers creating an oversupply. As a result, a storm of price wars is raging across the country, and looking at China overall, it's falling into deflation. So, what happens in a deflationary economy? Generally, prices of goods decline. When you hear deflation in China, you might imagine that prices for everything are dropping. However, what's actually happening is quite different. There's a term in Chinese, not the most flattering, that can be translated as the poor man's trio. What does it mean? It refers to three items that financially struggling people rely on to get by: instant noodles, cola, and pickled mustard greens. These items have long been regarded as the cheapest food and drink, a lifeline for people without money. But surprisingly, even these ultra-cheap items are seeing price increases. Why are these rising in price in the midst of deflation? Let's look at the specifics. For instance, instant noodles that used to cost 4.5 yuan are now priced at 5 yuan, a more than 10% increase. Bagged instant noodles have risen from 2.8 yuan to 3 yuan, which is slightly less than 10% but still a significant percentage increase. For cola, both Pepsi and Coca-Cola announced price hikes this June. A 500 milliliters bottle that used to sell for 3 yuan now costs 3.5 yuan, a more than 10% rise. In fact, 3 yuan bottles of cola are now almost impossible to find in stores. As for pickled mustard greens, their price has been steadily increasing for years. Over the past 14 years, the cost has multiplied sixfold. In other words, even the cheapest food items, instant noodles, cola, and pickled mustard greens, are becoming more expensive in China despite the overall deflationary trend. Considering the daily reliance on these items, this represents a significant financial burden over the course of a year. You may already have an idea of why this is happening. In Japan, too, food prices have risen far more sharply than the overall inflation rate of the economy. Everyone has noticed the significant increase in food costs. While one reason is the depreciation of the yen, global commodity and energy price increases are major contributors. Similarly, the Chinese yuan has depreciated significantly against the dollar, putting China in a situation somewhat similar to Japan. It's natural to think that the rising prices of instant noodles, cola, and pickled mustard greens in China are due to the same factors, but the article points out an even deeper and less obvious issue. Here's a simple analogy to explain it. Imagine a situation where people in China were generally affluent. If given a choice between butter and margarine, many would choose butter despite its higher price, because it tastes better. However, as people's financial situations worsen, they might opt for margarine because it's cheaper. If this happens to a large number of people, the supply-demand balance shifts. More people buying margarine leads to higher demand, which drives up prices. This same logic applies to the poor man's trio. As people who previously could afford better options start to rely on instant noodles, cola, and pickled mustard greens, demand for these items increases dramatically, disrupting the balance of supply and demand and pushing prices up. This is not merely a case of rising production costs. It reflects a significant issue: the decline of China's middle class and a growing number of people shifting toward cheaper consumption. On the other hand, the opposite phenomenon is happening with luxury goods and services for the wealthy. Expensive car models aren't selling well, and high-end delicacies like bird's nest, a popular product in China, are disappearing from stores altogether. This trend underscores a major problem: the overall impoverishment of the Chinese populace. The rising prices of the poor man's trio indicate that many people in China are struggling financially. This situation also suggests that the Chinese Communist Party's economic measures are ineffective or poorly timed. Unless they address the impoverishment of ordinary citizens and stimulate consumption, the economy will continue to stagnate. Even if local governments' debts are resolved, the economic cycle will not recover as long as people remain impoverished. Despite its claim to be a communist country, the Chinese government has not prioritized enriching its poor population. While they talk about poverty alleviation and unemployment measures, much of the budget allocated for these purposes disappears. Furthermore, there's no significant media presence in China to criticize this mismanagement since the media is under the control of the Communist Party. As a result, the current state of China is a product of its governance. The irony is that, despite its massive GDP growth, many Chinese people remain poor. This creates problems for other nations as well, as China's low labor costs due to its impoverished population sustain its competitive edge. For Japan, this serves as a cautionary example. Relying on cheap labor and low-cost production as a competitive strategy is unsustainable. Instead, Japan should focus on developing competitive products and services. Learning from the situations in other countries is essential. Understanding both the positive and negative outcomes of certain policies can help guide better decisions. Going forward, I aim to share more about how the policies of the Chinese Communist Party affect its people and what implications this has. That's all for this discussion. See you in the next video.